Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's July 20th. I'd like to begin the meeting for July 20th, Planning and Zoning, but I'd like the commissioners' patience, please. We don't have accurate identifications. So we're going to go back to, if you can remember, the fire department drill. When you wanted to speak, you raised your hand. So do you remember those days? So, and if you want to speak real badly, kind of.
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
But don't holler out. We want to welcome Miss Chelsea back too. And I guess we have to welcome Eddie too. Could you stand for the pledge, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Are you okay, Mr. Perez?
Yes.
Okay. Could we have the clerk read the roll call, please?
Chairwoman Spidell.
Yes, ma'am.
Vice Chairman Richardson.
Here.
Secretary Grant.
Here.
Member Perez.
Here.
Member Rice.
Here.
Member Aton.
Here.
Member Riley.
Here.
Alternate Member Faison.
Here.
Alternate Member Childs.
Here.
School Board Member Gilbert.
Mr. Perez, we're having technical problems tonight, so if you need to speak, raise your hand. And if it's urgent, give a little,
Okay.
thank you.
A queen wave.
Yes. No, not the queen wave, but, just a, yeah, okay. First item is approval of the minutes, please, for the meeting of July 6th. Mr. Rice, please.
Yeah, there is a correction.
Yes, sir.
On the minutes, and although it's giving me credit for being here, it's also giving me credit for not being here, and I was not here. Okay, so it does say Rice was present, and it says Rice was absent.
We're sometimes confused. We wished you were here.
So that's the only correction I saw.
Are there any additional corrections? Are there any additional additions? Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Perez. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nay. Thank you. Minutes are approved. Can we have our lovely counselor read the quasi-judicial confirmation procedures, please?
Yes, ma'am. All persons who anticipate speaking on any public hearing item must fill out an oath card to be heard on that agenda item and sign the oath contained thereon. These cards are located on the table near the entrance to the council chamber or may be obtained from the recording secretary. This meeting will be conducted in accordance to the procedures adopted in Resolution Number 24-1997. Those speaking in favor of a request will be heard first, those opposed will be heard second, and those who wish to make a public comment on the item will speak third. The applicant may make a brief rebuttal if necessary. A representative from either side, for or against, may cross-examine a witness. Anyone who speaks is considered a witness. If you have photographs, sketches, or documents that you desire for the commission to consider, they must be submitted into evidence and will be retained by the city. Please submit such exhibits to the recording secretary. Please be advised that the following board members, Linwood V. Rice and Thomas Perez, are dual members for Planning and Zoning Commission and the Titusville Environmental Commission, and these board members are permissible participants at each of these respective board meetings. For the quasi-judicial items on the agenda, anyone wishing to speak on these items must first sign a public hearing agenda card and sign the oath contained thereon. Those speaking in favor of a request will be heard first. If you have photographs, sketches, or documents that you desire for the planning and zoning to consider, they must be submitted into evidence and will be retained by the city. Please submit these exhibits to the recording secretary. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Does anyone need to disclose communication or substance of contact? Seeing none. New business, please. Staff?
Thank you, Chairwoman. Actually, we'll start with old business tonight with item 8A, which is Small Scale Comprehensive Plan Amendment Number 2, 2020, The Cottages. Rodney Honeycutt, representing Robert Carl Goth and Beverly Page Goth, trustees, is requesting a small scale comprehensive plan amendment and rezoning to allow for a residential use on a 9.7 acre portion of a 15 acre parcel located at the southwest corner of the US 1 Dairy Road intersection. The remaining 5.3 acres will remain in the commercial high-intensity future land use designation, but will be included in the Plan Development PD zoning district under a unified master plan. The applicant resubmitted the master plan. According to the applicant, the main difference is the revised plans is the additional buffering on the west and south sides of the site in response to comments from the community. The playground or tot lot is also spelled out in the plan. The enhanced buffering and opaque fence along the industrial area remains intact. So just a quick summary. This item came before Planning and Zoning previously on April 6th and was tabled for several concerns, including additional buffering and recreational amenities. The buffer on the, actually, if I could ask you all to turn to page 50 of the agenda tonight. That may help illustrate what I'm about to describe. The buffer on the west side was previously shown as 20 feet and has now been increased to 35 feet. And the buffer on the south was previously 20 feet and is now proposed to be 25 feet. The tot lot was also added, which is adjacent to the pool area. And so those are some of the changes from the previous plan. Tonight, we're asking for the Planning and Zoning Commission to make two recommendations. One is going to be on the future land use amendment, and the other is going to be on the zoning. I believe the applicant's here. If you have specific questions about the proposal, and if you have any questions for staff, I'd be glad to answer those.
Are there any cards on this item, clerk?
Yes.
And is everyone who wants to speak filled out a card? Thank you. What questions do commissioners have to begin with? None? Can we start with the cards, please?
Rodney Honeycutt.
Mr. Honeycutt.
Bob Cook. Okay.
Is it Mr. Cook, sir?
It's
Koch.
sounds like Scotch. It's an easy way to remember it. Sounds good.
Or it's German?
Yeah, well,
Yes.
yeah, it's, there it would be cold, but then you have to step aside.
Mine, yeah.
Is there a prompt for the presentation beside? Thank you so much. Let's see, will this work? I think it will. I'm not, he's probably got to get back there. Good evening. My name is Bob Koch. I'm an architect and also a sponsor of the project that you have before you. I'm a practicing architect in Winter Park, Florida for 58 years. And I spent my fledgling years practicing architecture right here in town. In fact, it was one of the many pencil pushers that worked on the project, the building we're standing in tonight. So I have a little bit of history with Titusville. It's a fond place in my personal memories. Having said that, there we go. The last time we met, it was late in the evening. I think there was a lot of fatigue all the way around. And so it was tabled because of the late hour and the shortness of the presentation. With your patience, I'd just like to give you the presentation that was intended because we were sort of short on time. You all know the site very well. I don't think I have to describe the site to you. Just for your refresher memory, it's at the intersection of Dairy Road and the Highway 101. However, it's not really on the highway. It's separated from the highway by the Rails to Trail program, so it's right-of-way. It is not right-of-way frontage on the highway. It fronts, in fact, the rails system. It does view to the highway, but it doesn't have direct access off the highway. Its access is exclusively from Dairy Road, and there is an existing curb cut that was built on Dairy Road when that road alignment was improved some years back that provided access to the parcel, and that's shown as our primary gateway we'll see in the plan. We're required to have two means of access for emergency purposes, so both, unfortunately, have to reside on Dairy Road. Additionally, we border an existing lumber yard, Roard Lumber Company. I'm sure you're familiar with that. And it is our neighbor and has been our friend throughout this entire process. By the way, we've been in this process for a little more than 2 years. COVID virus and changed the ordinance that required us to go to the planned development approach rather than a regular straight zoning has caused a series of prompted delays. We had 2 neighborhood meetings in the process, by the way, and we thank the neighborhoods for the contribution they made, and particularly want to thank Dan and the city staff for the deliberate attention they gave to all their concerns and the collaboration they gave to us to adapt the plan each time to something that hopefully will gain popular acceptance. The site is high and dry. It's substantially above the FEMA elevation. If you know Dairy Road, it rises up as it goes from east to west, of course. And strategically, it's a well-accessed site. It is also complemented by the availability of schools to the west, a wonderful big park across the highway to the east, and lots of good gainful employment within walking distance, especially since the trail facilitates that so well. In fact, we're only about a mile from the hospital and only 3 miles from the North Bridge. I'm going to hit this very briefly. I know some of the concerns that were expressed early on was fears that any project of this nature might in some way negatively impact the neighbor's values. And I wanted to offer you a few thoughts into your consideration because I think they're important. Today, 1/3 of all the households in the United States, 1/3 are tenants. In my childhood, renting meant you were a renter by necessity, not a renter by choice. But in fact, today, the renter by choice population represents more than half of those people who are tenants in dwellings today. And a much larger percentage when they're dwellings that are fashioned more as a single-family home as opposed to a multifamily home. A good portion of that population are seniors like me who are moving down, getting rid of the obligation to mow the lawn and clean the pool and change the filters, and are looking for the lock and leave lifestyle that seniors are affording. And so they're liquidating their equity, putting it into savings accounts, and living off the cash flow rather than having that as simply static funding. And so all those things have contributed to a massive growth, especially since 2008, the amount of single-family home buyers, even though you would think otherwise, but the market has actually been less than it had been before in years past. In fact, HUD reported to us last year that for the first time in history, less than 50% of the homes in the United States are primary dwellings, which is very interesting. So the delta between those two, by the way, are secondary homes, timeshare units, investment homes, things of that nature. Our product content is very unique. It's a one-story product fashioned in a duplex building type. And as the illustration tries to depict, each duplex is unique because the back wall of each unit is the common wall. So as you look at the illustration on the screen, the opposing faces of the rectangular boxes are really the front doors. And the front doors of each unit face a courtyard or a mews or a gathering court. It's a planning principle that actually goes all the way back to the 30s and the 40s that was used in the United States, before cars became the dominant portion of our population. And so every unit is a courtyard-oriented unit. None face the parking. They face the green. And then between each cottage or duplex cottage, the area that separates the two buildings, like a zero lot line, becomes a private, enclosed side yard. So unlike any apartment you've ever seen, and probably more like what you might find in a townhouse, which is usually larger units, every unit has an outdoor, private living area that comes with the occupancy, an outdoor space that they can enjoy in lots of different ways that you and I would do in our own backyards. A series of floor plans were included in it, and of course we are largely a rental community, so our unit sizes start at 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, and a select number of 3 bedrooms. The majority of the units, by far, 75%, are 1 and 2 bedroom units. Homes in that scale are not available new because no developers build 1 to 2. So that market share has no for sale market except tired inventory or older inventory. You could find a 1 bedroom condominium, but they're rare as well, as you can imagine. This illustration also shows how the private patio area that adjoins each unit is immediately to the side yard. And so the kitchen opens out into that area, the dining room opens out into that area. It is actually an indoor-outdoor relationship, which images will depict. So here's an interior view of one of the units. You can see on the upper right the view just slightly out into the side patio that's part of that unit occupancy. These are apartment scales too. They range from 650 to 1,175 square feet. Now, to put that in perspective, that means our average duplex is about the size of a single-family house. And the occupancy in these units would aggregate to no more than you would find in both units in a single-family home, because the national statistics tell us what the average population of a unit would be based on 1, 2, and 3-bedroom units in a rental community. And they wind up being almost the same. So while on the surface, density may appear a little higher than you might like, and in terms of intensity, in terms of people and square footage, it really isn't much more than you would find in a single-family development. It is more, but not horrifically more. It's not like a 3-story project where the density could be 5 to 6 times the calculus. This gives you a little illustration of what one of those courtyards would look like from the parking. So there are units which are closer to the parking, so those who have mobility limitations can get to and from it with greater ease. And those who would rather have the privacy of being further from the parking can walk a little bit further for the reward of that distance. Not uncommon in apartment projects. There's any number of projects that you can see where units are on the street side, and then on the back side, units that face them face away. And many times you have to walk around the building to get to those doors. So the distances in the industry that are standard are 150 feet normally from parking to the entry to the building. And we have 140 feet to the longest distance to the furthest building, and on average, about 40 to 50 to every unit. A little cottage architecture, a bungalow architecture borrowed from an era of Florida that has come back into fashion, by the way, if you watch any of the home decor channels. Farmhouse and traditional architecture has become a new fashion statement that a younger generation is accepting. And then this shows the scale and the proportion of one of those outdoor living areas. These are private areas that you can grill in because you don't have those limitations you do in apartments. They're private areas you can dine in. They're private areas you can sunbathe in because you've got nobody looking over you, onto you, in your own backyard. And then if you have a pet or you have an infant, it's also a backyard where they can actually play within line of sight. You don't have to go to a playground, even though we have a playground, and always did have a playground intended for the site. This master plan that we've done added to the image that you saw before an illustration of the commercial frontage, which is the buildings that you see on the upper right-hand corner. In the spirit and the scale of the project that we're talking about, these two are one-story structures. They're done in a village scale approach where each box is smaller than you would find in a normal retail. And they speak directly to the path that is the trail system and to the path along Dairy Road. So they invite access directly without going through parking lots from all the trail systems that come to and around our site. And so you could either park in the center behind the buildings, out of view from the street, or you could walk to them through the trail systems that surround them on the north and the east. As mentioned before, the buffers have been increased substantially. Our buffer for the records on the west and the entire L-shaped configuration of the west, if you want to look at it. That's where we adjoin the only single-family homes that abut us. So there are 3, and they're on very large lots, so they're very substantial homes. We have 4 dwellings that actually confront that property line directly. In addition to the 35-foot buffer, we have another 10-foot setback to the building line. So there's a total of 45 foot. Now, our building ridge on these one-story buildings is 15 feet. Our drip line on the edge is 10 foot. So to put that into proportion, from the counter that I'm looking at to the wall behind me is 35 foot. That's the breadth of the buffer. From the wall behind you, that's the distance to the building. And to the height of the building, it's less than the height of the wall in this building. So that gives you some scale proportionality in realizing how much buffer there is, how much additional setback there is, and how much the height of the building is in the closest of all the situations that you see on the screen. A lot of small tweaking, by the way, were done to achieve all these things, even though the big changes were the ones that were mentioned. A lot of small contributions and scaling and adjustments had to be made, so the plan really was refreshed from the ground up since our last session. Just for the record, we did have a playground. It just was not footnoted on the drawings. I apologize to you. At the entrance point to the project, we basically have a clubhouse and an amenity complex that includes a pool, indoor fitness, common area for gathering, and it also has the maintenance operations and the trash management operations. And as you can see behind the pool, we have a playground that is there as well. And that playground is all a part of a unified campus. And so here are images of the clubhouse as proposed. Just for the record, the top one is the back looking at it from the pool. The other one is from the loggia behind the clubhouse. There's a picture of playground equipment typical to what you would find in a location like this. And then again, as a reminder in the upper right, the fact that every unit itself has the capacity for people to have their children, if they have children in these locations, less likely in a 1, very unlikely in a 2, highly only probable in a 3, just because that's the typical national demographic. But anyway, there's an opportunity for playgrounds throughout the community, private as well as communal. I talked a little bit about the parking and walking convenience because it had been raised the last time, and I want to also reference the accessibility question. Because this is built as a duplex, it is built under the Florida State Residential Code, not under the building code. And as you know, if you live in a home, you have no obligations in a home to design for the accessible individual. If an accessible individual wants it, they have to fund it themselves. And so all primary dwellings, 1-family dwellings, 2-family dwellings, and even 3-family dwellings are exempt from the federal statutes and the state statutes with regard to accessibility. On a voluntary program, we have designed all our units to comply with federal fair housing, which is a more stringent accessibility test for residential. And so all our units are accessible, and all our routes from the parking to the units are accessible paths, are accessible parking spaces, and the units most likely to be accessible by demand are immediate to one another. In other words, you would have a unit closer to the parking if that was your preference. You're not restricted to that, but if you had that mobility limitation, you'd be available. And every unit type is available near the parking. So the ability to accommodate those people with mobility impairment, or whether temporary or permanent, is invested into far more aggressively than you would find in your typical 3-story apartments where there's no elevator requirements. Only the first floor has to be accessible. That means only 1/3 of the units have to offer that convenience. Here it's 100%. So summary conditions, as I think it's easy to say, this site is zoned commercial. High density commercial if you read the staff report. Ours is a down zoning of both the density and the intensity and all the consequential effects in terms of traffic if you do engineering analysis from what could allow today without the benefit of a zoning hearing. It's a transitional use that naturally transitions between single-family dwellings, which are to the west, and the community that surrounds it, and also to the high-density entitlement that's on the industrially zoned land that the lumberyard currently occupies. And so when you think about those two adjacencies, no matter what you do, you're always going to have a fractious relationship. We feel that this is a proper layering and stepping, which is consistent with the language in your own land development code. And so with that, I'll be very quick to end because I'm tired and it's been a long day for me. But I would welcome any questions and the right to comment should any opposition arise.
I first of all would like to thank you, Mr. Hush, because you've answered, you've amended your plan and answered some of our concerns that we definitely had, especially concerning play areas and accessibility. Those were 2 areas I was concerned with. I do have some concerns, that still have concerns, and one of which involves children again. The location of your development lends itself to no bus service to Madison Middle School or Oak Park.
That is correct.
And I'm not sure about Astronaut. Astronaut might be further enough away that
That's
I think it's a 2-mile
Whatever the radius is. but that is correct.
situation.
Yeah.
Tell me about the sidewalks for a child who would be forced to walk to, let's say, first of all, Madison or Oak Park, which are right next to each other.
Correct. And they're on the same south side of Dairy Road.
Correct.
And there is a wide sidewalk that extends all the way down to our property on that edge. So there, from our site to the sidewalk system is immediate. And we access that sidewalk directly with pedestrian connectivity. So that is a fluid path. The only traffic crossings would be the intersecting streets that you say. I'd like to add a footnote, though, if I may, Madam Chairman. In apartment occupancy, especially when there are 1, 2s, and 3s, the child population nationally is really very modest. Most of the time, these are pre-family or post-family occupancies. They're not people that have, 4 or 5 children. In fact, there's an occupancy limit built into the lease. Nationally, based on 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom units in a typical apartment project, and because this is our primary competition, although I'll be candid with you in telling you that this is targeted at workforce housing opportunities, not affordable housing that might be requiring subsidy. But workforce housing means that the household income is between 80 and 120% of median income, okay, on the household. So it's size dependent. The median income depends on how many people live in the household. And so those are your nurses, those are your dentists, not your dentist, your firemen, your policemen, your service provider at the restaurant you eat on, the person who checked you out of the grocery store. Those are the people that really are the backbone of our working culture. And so I want you to know that we're not trying to promote a purposeful view that this is a luxury setting. It's going to be a very nice product. It's a long-term asset. Let me point out to that. This is not a short-term build and flip kind of a deal. This is a legacy asset for my estate, my family, my children, my grandchildren, which unfortunately I have all of those. And they still call on me for money every once in a while. And so at the end of the day, this is a part of the family planning for a long horizon, which I'm sure you all do. The average child nationally in an apartment project, a conventional project, is 1 child for every 10 bedrooms using the mix that we have. So if that were still school-age child, excuse me, let me qualify that. It doesn't include college students, but a school-age child. So at 97 units, I think we have, and if we figured an average of 2, that'd be a roughly 200 bedrooms. That would mean that we would have 20 school-age children in its entirety as a likely profile if we follow the national demographic. And I have no reason to think we're not. In fact, I have reason to think we'll be less simply because the product itself is so age and mobility sensitive. We believe that at least 25% of our residents will be in my age group. And for the record, I'm 80. Okay, so I've tried to procreate, and it's impossible. So I don't think I'll have a school-age child in my near future unless I get one by inheriting it. So it's really a sensitive issue, but it's a little bit overblown if it's expected to be a population of kids. If you were in an affordable community, affordable housing community, you would find the average bedroom count is 3, sometimes 4 bedrooms per unit. And the head count is often 2 times the bedroom count. That's a community that you would find a big population of children. But this product is meant for that transitional ages, 18 to 30, 50 to whatever. And there'll be some middle managers in there. There'll be some executives that are working at the Cape that will use this as a home when they're not here, but they have to go to the Cape regularly, so they'll rent a unit so that they don't have to have a hotel every time they're in town. But the principal portion of our population will be in those 2 bookend communities that I mentioned to you before. So I'm sorry for being so long-winded in the answer, but I think it's important to understand that infants and children will not overpopulate the site. In fact, you would get more children on the site subdivided into a standard residential subdivision with larger lots.
Will there be an HOA attached to this
There's
project?
no HOA because this is a wholly owned asset. It's not subdivided. It's not sold incrementally. It's an owner. This investment will be somewhere in the range of about a $18 million investment overall. So it's a substantial investment that's being made in the community. It will be operated with how can I say this? A resident equity kind of approach. And I'll give you an example of one of the things that we do. Instead of charging rent for the unit, we actually have 2 charges. We have a resident association fee, not an owner's association fee, which takes care of the grounds. And then we have rent that's separate. Normally, those are fused together if you rent an apartment. We separate the 2. So they recognize that they're also paying for the lawn maintenance, for the pool maintenance, for the filter changes, for the roof repairs, for the plumbing repairs. All those things are put into the resident association fee. They add up to the competitive rent that they have to be at for the markets that we've just described. But it gives to the resident consumer a sense of the cost associated with having a home. Even if they rented a home, many times they'd have to add to that rent the lawn care, the pool care, the filter care, all the pest control, all the things that they still have to pay that are embedded in the service agreement. And so, by the way, the resident association would, within the community, vote on improvements based on a fund that would be set aside year to year that they feel would be best in the interest of the residents. So it might be additional features for the playground. It could be some other accessory. It could be putting a bus stop if in fact we could get bus service on the corner.
Questions right now? Yes, Ms. Riley, please.
What do you expect that, you're saying that these are all going to be rental units?
That's correct.
Not, you wouldn't sell them to anybody if they wanted to buy them?
No, because our financial structure, this is not a condominium, and we're not subdividing or platting the land into lots. And so without those instruments, there's no way to sell incrementally an interest in any unit. It is a wholly owned asset, just like any apartment project.
Okay.
Now, you and I have both seen a wave of condominium conversions in the year past. And, many times that was done during depressive economic periods as an opportunity stroke by the people who owned it. This is not in our business plan.
But what is the typical rent that would, let's say, for the two-bedroom unit?
You're going to see a scattering of things. Surprisingly enough, on the under 30 classification, 50% will be two guys, two gals, a guy and a gal co-inhabiting to bring their housing costs down to a threshold they can afford. I don't know if you've had college-age children, but what did they do when they went to college? They were in that co-inhabiting mode. And when they graduate from college, many times they still want to have that sort of roommate kind of experience because it helps them keep their housing costs at a moderated basis. The other 50% of the two-bedroom market would be either a starter family, a husband and wife just starting. Sometimes it's a single parent who has temporary custody. Sometimes it's a young executive person or couple who want an extra room for a home office. And by the way, if you haven't followed the trends in the industry, the home office in the rental market is the biggest trend away.
So
And
what would the rent be for a two-bedroom?
It depends a little bit on the circumstance of the unit, but if we took as an average the median income of that household of two at $50,000, okay, just an example, then the 50,000 would your rent would be 1/3 of that on an annual basis. So what would that be? 1/3 of 50 would be 16,000. 16,000 divided by 12 would be $1,200. There's a number for you. Now, that excludes, of course,
I'm not
electric.
saying the exact number, but
No,
just
but
the
I'd say
general,
that,
general two-bedroom.
The same underwriting that you do when you buy a house that limits how much you can borrow is usually pegged to how much you make, correct? The same underwriting is done in a very well-managed apartment project. And so we use the income of the household to back into the rental capacity, and we will rent to them as long as their income to rent is proportionate to what you see in the purchase formulas in most mortgage environments.
Okay, if we could move on to something else.
Sure.
So I noticed and I read through the papers this morning that, that there was a potential of having another driveway that would intersect the coast-to-coast trail. But then I think staff's recommendation was that you not have that one that would go through the trail. Do you know what I'm
We
talking
did not
about?
have any proposal, nor were we ever told we could have a crossing over the trail. We do have an easement through our site that was pre-exists our purchasing the land that services the lumber yard. It gives the lumber yard a side access out of their property so that they can get to the signal at Dairy Road because their site does not have a signaled intersection. It does have access onto the highway, but we have no easement access across their land. They have easement access across
So at
ours,
this point, there's no plan to have.
nor whether it's ever.
To build a roadway,
No.
just because I ride my bicycle along that route, and there are a lot of already intersections, and every time you have an intersection, you've got a potential for an accident.
And the neighboring property, regrettably, because it goes back way before the trail existed, is basically one large curb cut that stretches for about 100 feet in front of the.
And unfortunately, here in Florida, especially in this area here, we have a lot of incidents of bicycle and pedestrian accidents. So I'm looking at that, but you have no plans to
plan.
do that.
The only thing that we would hope to do, we have a buffer along the highway, or actually along the rail system, that we would like to be able to offer a place where someone bicycling or somebody walking who wanted to stop for a cold drink or stop in and walk into a shop, or maybe bike to the shop to get a hair done, could do so without coming into the campus. They could actually access it directly from the trail.
And one more thing, in the staff, they said they proposed a 6-foot wall between your property and the industrial property, I suppose, to the east. And is that something that you're okay with?
We've accepted that obligation, but I would remind you that the industrial property will have an additional buffer requirement in addition to what we have, should they ever redevelop, and an obligation for a wall as well. So at some point in time, we're building their wall. So it's a measured degree of unfairness, but if that's the price it pays to do business in Titusville, maybe that's what we have to do.
Okay, one last question. Did you have anything to do with designing the University of Florida Law School?
Not that I know of, but I was a master.
Curiously, when I came from the University of Florida Law School to this area and saw this building, I thought it was designed by the same architect.
Well, the building architect for this was Lemon and Meganson, and they're the firm that I work for. I did my internship with them, great guys, and they were specialists in educational architecture. They also did Brevard Community College here in town, and they did Titusville Astronaut High, both of which I worked on as well. But it wasn't my handiwork. I was the master planner for the University of Central Florida. That's how old I am. That's when it was Florida Tech, if you go back that far. And I did the first 5 buildings there as the principal designer for the firm.
Okay, thank
in those
you.
years. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Coach. Mr. Rice, please.
So if I understand what I heard you say, if we added a condition to this approval, that there would be no access to US 1 from the commercial property, you would have no problem with that?
100%.
Okay.
Actually, we wouldn't want it. Okay, I think we think the arrangement we have is a much more safety-oriented arrangement, shall we say.
That's the only question at this time I have.
Thank you.
I'll have others later.
Mr. Payson.
Hello, Scott, Mr. Koch.
Yes, sir.
So you did a great job of telling us about national numbers, which are awesome. But you have yet to address the numbers that are here in Titusville and Brevard County and the need that exists here. When you use the numbers of combined income of say $50,000, just as an example, well, that $1,200 for rent right now is very low for the city of Titusville. So let's talk about locally numbers here, right? So have you done your research on the need that exists here today in the city of Titusville? That's
We
the first
did,
question.
we did a market study. We'll be more than glad to provide it for you. And our market study, which was done 2.5 years ago, has been influenced by an inflationary trend that has been unprecedented, 30% a year over the last 2 years. So that's how much economic challenge that has been added to our agenda. And while incomes have grown, they have been grown at a disparate ratio to the cost of development, as you can well imagine. So the challenge is not by any means guaranteed, but the spirit of the goal is the same. As you know, because I think you're an advocate for affordable housing, they have the benefit of having incentive programs and assistance programs through the low-income housing tax credit that gives them a mechanism for approving. But there are no dedicated enterprises in the development industry, and we do about 8,000 units as architects a year, that are committed to a workforce housing because they're outside the incentive agenda. So there's no dollars out there to help them, and yet they represent the largest portion of the workforce that we have in Central Florida, in Titusville too, because Titusville is sort of a sharp contrast community where it has a lot of people on limited or moderate or retirement incomes, and then it has some of the high technology people who work at the Cape that have numbers that would make us all smile if we could earn that kind of money. So it's kind of bipolar, if you will. But the center, the missing middle, as is coined in the statistics, is really the market that no one is talking to. None of the home builders are talking to them. None of the multifamily rental people are talking to them. Unless you're willing to accept a home with wheels, there is no option in that income class.
All right, which is great, and I do understand that. So what does that need to look like here in the city of Titusville? So that missing middle, because again, Titusville is a very polarized location. So we do have folks that are making in excess of triple number Ks, and then those that are blue collar workers. So what is the numbers of individuals that fit that demographic for which you're in search of?
In our study for this area, and we used a 5-mile radius around the site, the market study predicted there was need for 1,500 units in the size we proposed. Not 3-bedroom houses, but 1, 2, and 3-bedroom apartments. And so 1,500 units may sound like a lot or a small amount, but we're doing less than 100. So we're not really tapping into the need. We're trying to solve part of the need, but we will not begin to resolve the demand that we see. So I'd have to update the numbers. I'd be happy to present you with the guy that did our statistical analysis. He's out of Dallas, Texas. He's a national guy. By the way, he does it for HUD, Housing and Urban Development. And if you want to think about multifamily housing, the federal government has a program that will assist multifamily housing developers to fund their projects with long-term fixed-rate mortgages. And that program is very advantageous. So most apartment developers who have a legacy approach to the investment work with HUD to get that funding program available. By
And
the way,
that's
it's not subsidized. It's just an entitlement program that the federal government allows for.
And last but not least, for the commissioners, there is a community, much like the one he's proposing, that's over in Cocoa. It's not too far off of 520 and US 1. So I saw something that resembles something like this, and something actually I was in favor of, and I am in favor of. So thank you.
Thank you very much for your question.
Mr. Perez?
I'm sure we had this discussion previously, but it's been a while. As far as the trees and vegetation that's in the area, what's going to be your approach to trying to keep as much of that as possible intact?
I can answer that question on a conceptual level. I can't answer it on an engineered level because we haven't done the engineering. And of course, we have the best engineer we think the area can afford and our consultant. The site is largely vegetated trees with trees that were volunteers over time because that site was once cleared and was an industrial facility. That doesn't mean they're not statured, but many of the trees are also corrupted by debris from that era, which means to cleanse the site, we're basically going to have to harvest the trees around them. So the primary objective is to protect the buffers. Those separations that we have from the street and all the edges, those areas are intended to be protected, so what is there now will remain, and where necessary will be supplemented to ensure, over a 5-year period, a visual opaqueness of about 80%. Now, with a fence, that may not mean anything because that will give you 100%, but the fence we propose is 100% opaque as well. So you're really talking about aerial vegetation as opposed to lower vegetation in that case. Within each cluster, and if you were looked into detail, the original plan had a sidewalk going in the center of the cluster and feeding out to the buildings. What we have done is taken the sidewalk and pushed it out to the edges and created a loop in every one of those courtyards. What that loop does is allows us to define any, ensemble of trees that live in the courtyard and to protect them because we won't be walking through them. We'll be walking around them. So there's an area in every cluster that if good fortune presides that are trees there, we'll save them. The site is high and dry, and so grading the site will not require mass grading that would necessarily kill every tree. But don't be surprised if a good part of the site is cleaned because we have so much to do here between utilities and infrastructure and parking and buildings. But I would tell you the buffer is protected. I will tell you the areas within each cluster are designed to keep trees within those clusters that may reside there. And I would tell you we would certainly want a vigorous tree planting program. I'm sorry for being such a lectionist. I teach for Urban Land Institute, so I tend to put on my teacher's hat, so I apologize if I'm a little bit too professorial.
I have additional environmental concerns, so I'm going to piggyback. And my concern is, has there been an environmental study for this particular site because of the concrete plant?
There's been a phase one, and the phase one did not indicate a problem, but visual inspection indicates a concern, because the material that's there is really the slag material, that broken pieces of concrete and other things like that were just deposited there at a time when there was no restrictions against it. And we don't know how deep it goes. We know whether it's buried. Obviously, when you dig a hole and you hit something that you don't like, you have to take it out. So it's sort of a discovery process. We have no evidence of any environmental issues. We have not done a bugs and bunnies study, for the record. We would have to do that too. So that would, consist of things from the gopher tortoise to whatever a critter has a protected status.
So there has not been an extensive environmental study concerning the effects of this concrete on surface soil, which will be disturbed once you start moving the soil.
Well, I'm going to hope that there is no material there that I can't warrant that the concrete in that era wasn't built with asbestos, for instance. And by the way, if
Correct.
it is, it's already disturbed. I mean, it's already in the soil. So the obligation, of course, there would be to cleanse it. So if we have a pre-existing condition, we'll be obligated to clean the condition. We're not going to aggravate a condition that's already there, but we may remedy it if it's there.
Can I ask staff a question? Can that be a condition attached?
Good question. I'm not sure how staff would track that, just because the Department of Environmental Protection would be involved with remediation of a site and testing. So you can propose it as a recommendation, a recommended condition. I'd have to do some more research into that.
I would think it'd be respectfully very honest to say that if there was an issue here, we could not finance the project. So, you know, for the project to be built, we'd have to remedy any issue. Now, we don't have any evidence there is a problem, but we do have evidence there's a debris problem. There's this material that were fragments from the earlier fabrication that went on site.
But
that have to
this
be
was
removed.
quite a manufacturing operation at one point.
It was a cement, as I understand it, a cement manufacturing that built precast concrete components.
And we don't know what chemicals were used with the manufacturing of that, and we don't know
True.
the chemical content
Right.
of the debris that's been left on the site.
But normally a phase one would give evidence through the title research and the history of the site to suggest whether or not there was reason to do a phase two study. And the phase one study did not advance that proposal. So we have no reason to think there's a problem there. But I would tell you, certainly, if in the improvements that we have to do, we discover something that is unforeseen, we'd be obligated to cure it. And we wouldn't have any choice. I mean, it's just, if you have any involvement in commercial lending, you know that the banks will not lend on sites that have environmental issues.
That's my concern.
In which case, there's no project to have concern about.
Thank you so much.
Oh,
Additional questions? Mr. Childs?
I just want to say that I think your project looks beautiful. I think it'd be a huge improvement for the area, and I thank you for the presentation. Looked really good. Just want to say that.
so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. I do take compliments well, so I put that on the record.
Mr. Richardson?
Yes, I have different concerns than most people do. As you know, I'm disabled,
Yes, sir.
and about 30% of the units on the site plan, I cannot travel that far.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the plan would be extremely accessible if you had to eliminate probably 16 units, and there was a road around the bottom portion and the top portion. Because if you think, I cannot do it, if these senior people, I don't think they could take groceries 140 feet, which I saw your first reading of the ordinance again at council, where Joe Robinson asked you the specific question.
He did.
Of how far did you have to travel from the parking lot to the first unit back? And in this kind of weather, I don't think anybody could. I think you've crammed as many units as possible in this piece of property. And from a street view, it looks great. From an overhead view, I'll say what I did last time you were here. It looks like Army barracks.
Well, fortunately, most of us don't see it from overhead unless we have a drone. But at the end of the day, each half of the building, by the way, is fashioned with a different color and a different feature and different appointments. So each half of every duplex looks like a separate dwelling. Unfortunately, the graphics we gave you the last time showed the whole thing as it was one color. In fact, they won't be. So that's why the liberty was taken on the renderings to advance an older picture. These are small dwellings. They're 25 by 30 for the one bedroom and 25 by
Okay,
50. for
so
the
in
three bedroom.
essence, the only real change has been the setbacks. but you haven't changed any of the access problems that I talked about last time you were here.
Well, you addressed the access problems, but the position you took did not recognize that the people of circumstance that share your infirmity have accommodations where they could park 20 feet from their door. The accessible parking spaces will always be convenient to the parking, and every unit type, whether it be 1, 2, or 3 bedrooms, will find its placement somewhere in the campus close to that parking space. And so
That
it's,
appears to me to be only 30% of them.
well, I live in an industry where 150 feet is considered the design goal to a building, and then you go within the building to your door. Most senior housing communities, since we're using seniors for the moment, that are multi-story buildings, don't count the distance through the corridors, up the elevators, and to the door. That 150 foot is just to the door. And those standards are being met and exceeded in all of our design. So there's no room to add more roads, and there's no economic to add more roads, so I'm disappointed I can't satisfy you, but I can tell you, I wouldn't make an investment if I didn't have the confidence that it would work.
If somehow there was some internal roads, not necessarily that they could park there, but they can have access, a loading zone where they can load and unload groceries, load and unload people in wheelchairs, it would be much more acceptable. But the way it is now, I think it's cramming too many units in a limited amount of space. And they're forgetting about disabled people like me. And I will say, as a side note, that my mom worked for Limited Medicine. And
Did she really?
typed every part of the specs on an IBM selector too, in 1968 and 69.
The speedball, yeah, I can remember that. I probably knew her then. I'm sorry that we can't satisfy your concerns, but I think we've gone well beyond any regulatory mandate that I know of by making sure that every unit has an accessible quality to it.
Mr. Anton?
A couple questions on, so the road on the east side of the retention pond that, according to the drawing, kind of goes to nowhere, but based on what you said, I assume that's the easement for Brevard Lumber, so
That is correct.
their delivery trucks will have the right to use that section of road that you've built there to get out to Dairy Road?
That easement precedes us. It's on the plat today.
Right, but I'm
and-
assuming now it's just a dirt or gravel road?
It's actually an overgrown trail. You can't go through it. And as I understand the history, I was not here at the time, when the Rails to Trails program came in, when the highway was being modified, there was the threat that they would lose access off the highway because they were crossing the railroad easement that was there previously, and probably done so at a time when there was no railroad involvement in making crossings. That's how old that lumber yard is. And so they were fearful that they would have their access completely taken away by removing any crossing of the railroad easement. So the easement was awarded to them as an alternative route should that happen. Subsequent to that, they thought it would be good to have light access when the traffic light at Dairy Road came into play. But so far, none of those concerns have ever arisen to the surface. But we have an obligation to provide an easement. We wish to fulfill that obligation. They're very willing to accept that fulfillment because then they'll have an ability to use it, which right now they don't.
So is it an easement, or are you actually gonna put a paved
No, it's going to be a road. In fact, if you look at it, it's actually part of the drive system for the parking domain for the non-residential portion of the site. On the last plan that I exhibited on the screen, the drive is really a part. It's a drive lane along the edge of the parking lot that serves the commercial frontage.
Okay, so once the commercial's developed, it'll be
Yeah,
somewhat
and we'd
incorporated.
probably build it in initially simply because we have to build in the ponds and we need to have the roads for the servicing of the ponds and everything else that you see on the stormwater system.
And so on the ponds, that was the second part of my question. So since the site's high and there is debris on the site and there's a significant amount of dirt that'll need to be extracted to create the ponds, where's all that going?
Dirt has a value today, in case you hadn't been tracking construction costs. And that material, which is sensitive, will have to go into an appropriate landfill. But the material is good. It will find a home. I doubt that that will be a problem, because our site is very proud against the street. It's elevated against the street. So it does have a very good grade. And it has good permeability, too. It's good, fine, clean Florida sand. It's basically a sand dune from sometime well before my life began.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Do you have any additional questions for Ms. Couch from Commissioners? Thank you, sir.
Thank you for your studious questions. I appreciate it.
Second card, please.
Rodney Honeycutt.
Mr. Honeycutt.
Good evening, Chairman, members. Rodney Honeycutt, 3700 South Washington Avenue in Titusville. You can see why I thought Bob should go first. He knows this product very well. Just a few things I wanted to mention is that we have tried hard to satisfy people on this site. I don't know if you remember, but in 2020, we started with like an R2 or R3 zoning, and staff had some concerns about limiting the number of units because that's just so many units per acre, and so we changed to PD. Because of the PD, you can only have the number of units that you have approved on the plan, and so that's what we have now. That required another community meeting, which we conducted also. After that, there were some concerns about the being located adjacent to the industrial on the south half of the property, and so that's when we added the additional buffer, an enhanced buffer, and also an opaque fence in that area to help. I think at the last meeting before we tabled, there were concerns from some of the neighbors or comments, and also some, I think, on this board that mentioned maybe that extra buffer ought to have been on the west side instead of the east side. And so we went back and looked hard, and were able to also add that buffer on the west side. And so my point being, we're trying hard to meet the comments and requests that we're getting. A couple of other things I want to add is there are public utilities for this site, water, sewer, and natural garbage pickup. Even though there's sewer, it's not by gravity. There's a lift station. The lift station will be private. There won't be any cost to the city. It'll also serve, in the future, it'll serve the commercial side. Like Bob said, there are no connections across the trail to US 1. The access will be on Dairy Road. And so not only is that important, I think, for comments and you guys, I mean, that's important for people that walk the trail or ride the trail. It makes it a lot safer. And so I just wanted to bring up those points and see if you guys had any comments or questions for me.
Those points are well made, and I'll compliment you for the work that you have done, because you've addressed some serious concerns that we had, 2 months ago. And I am still concerned about 97 units, though. What questions do commissioners have, Mr. Honeycutt? I see none. Mr. Rice, no? Okay, I just saw you wiggling. I didn't know whether the hand was
He
going to
wiggled
come
his
up.
ear, not his hand.
Okay, yeah, I never know. He's very sneaky about that. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next card, please.
Noelle Castro.
Mr. Castro.
Hi, my name's Noelle Castro.
Your address, sir? Address.
My address, I have property here in Titusville, and I actually sleep in Orlando. I bought a property here about 3 years ago. want to share a few things that I've heard. The gentleman that spoke first is very eloquent in his presentation. There's a lot of information that he was throwing out, and it sounds beautiful. It sounds real nice. I thought so, but I'm not a fan of his project. The reason that I'm not a fan of his project is that I think there's just absolutely too many homes on that little piece of property. I have 1 acre back there, and I am the 7 that was on the map, that's on the west side. And I initially came into the room today to express my concerns as to how they're gonna keep people off my property. And they proceeded to tell me about the increase in the buffer zone and the fence. And he proceeded to talk about no homeowners association. I live in a homeowners association. I'm not a great fan of homeowners association, but I see their value, okay? And when he identified the fact that it's private business, and there's 2 different funds, one for the buildings and one for whatever projects they feel like they want to work on, that led me to think that, well, maybe they're not going to do anything. Maybe they're just here for collecting dollars to fund their life, and the neighbors in the area are not going to get anything out of this. All we're going to get is a big headache. Again, he made it sound beautiful, but I'm not buying it. I work in the fire department, and been doing that for over 30 years. I also work in the physical therapy department. I'm a licensed therapist in the state of Florida, license number 18523. And I know what the gentleman's talking about, ADA. As a person that used to be a home health aide, to go out and visit people and take people around just to get them out of their houses, I'm questioning the size of the sidewalks to begin with, the green space. It needs to be large enough so wheelchairs can get on there. I'm not sure what the code is here, but there is. Does that mean my time's up?
It does.
Well, anyways.
Motion that he be allowed to continue for a minute.
Would you like another minute, sir?
Yes, ma'am. I just want to touch a little bit. I want to touch about the gentleman on that side said something in regards to a place in Cocoa that's good. In his standards, it was good. But I want to know if they have a homeowners HOA. I want to know, are they adjacent to people, single-family homes? There's a lot of questions when he commented that it was positive, and that doesn't tell me that there's nothing negative. I'm sure there's some things negative, but that negativity never came out. And and one more thing that I need to tell you. There was an individual, because my neighbor called me, and they walked through my property to get to the back of the property. And when I moved there, not only is there concrete there, but there's black asphalt all over. There's, because I saw it, and I said, where did all this come from? And they told me about the concrete, and I don't know where the black asphalt came from, but there is a state official did walk the property, and maybe somebody knows the answers to what came out of that. I don't know. They said that there was an investigation, and it was going to take a little bit of time to get it accomplished.
Thank you so much,
That's all
Mr.
I got.
Castro.
Thank you.
Next card, please.
Kay St. Ange.
Ms. Hodge.
Good evening. Yes, Kay St. Ange, Maryland Avenue, and I live about a half a mile from the proposed cottages. I appreciate applicants' revisions to the master plan, but still, why should Planning and Zoning Commission approve rezoning that is considered incompatible by staff and the code? Staff points out in the agenda packet the city's code indicates a multiple family residential development such as the proposed 97 duplex units called the cottages is incompatible adjacent to a heavy industrial zone and used property such as Brevard Lumber Company. Yes, I know they plan on increasing the buffers, but the law says it's incompatible to build residential next to heavy industrial. Also, why should Planning and Zoning Commission approve zoning that is inconsistent with development in the area? Staff points out that the average residential lot size within 500 feet of the proposed multiple family development is 1 acre. And some of those people have lived there for decades. And therefore, the density or intensity of the proposed rezoning to allow 97 units on 9.7 acres is inconsistent with development in the area. Why should Planning and Zoning Commission approve a project that will generate 643 average daily vehicle trips on adjacent roads, including Dixie Highway, which has no shoulder, no curbing, no sidewalk, and already is dangerous to pedestrians, bicyclists, and children? Already the traffic at Derry and US 1 makes it dangerous for pedestrians and bicyclists to cross over to Chain of Lakes Park. I try to do that daily and hold my breath. Why should Planning and Zoning Commission approve a project that will remove the majority of trees from 9.7 heavily wooded acres? The removal of these trees will increase temperatures in Titusville and reduce carbon sequestration, adding to climate change, which is just tops on the list of global problems right now. As you've seen, not only in the United States, but Europe, we're dealing with global climate change. If we keep cutting down these trees, it's just going to get hotter and hotter and hotter. So I ask that Planning and Zoning Commission deny SSA 2-2020, the cottages. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you. Additional cards?
That's all the cards.
Is that it? Additional comments from commissioners? Any questions? Yes, Mr. Rice. Thank you.
I have several questions. Some of staff, some might be directed toward the applicant. Just get back to my page. In the table on page 6 or page 14 of 134, you have a table showing what the commercial CC and the PD master plan. It talks about the setbacks, the heights, and all of that. So basically what this graph is saying is the height for the CC, there is no height restriction.
Check 14.
In CC is what this is telling me.
Correct.
But the height restriction for this development is 35 feet.
Correct.
Okay. So that's less than tenths.
Yes.
Okay. Open space. The commercial has 0 requirement. So if this stayed commercial, it'd have 0 requirement of open space.
Correct.
But they're required to have 35%, and I guess they're proposing 40%.
Yes.
Okay. The setbacks look to be all pretty close to the same, with the exception if you go over 35 feet, then you have to add additional setbacks for the commercial side. Okay. So that's the first thing. The site plan showed on that rear next to the single-family homes that are in the county, it's a 25-foot landscape buffer, but I saw also there's an additional 10 feet of right-of-way being dedicated for the road, is what it looked like to me on the site plan. Is that because that road is currently there and needs that 10 feet? And maybe the applicant or the engineer can address that.
The roadway has been there a long time, and there's supposed to be an easement, but there was no record found that there is an easement for that road. And so the client is willing to dedicate 10 feet to make sure that's clear on their property, that road. Does
Okay,
that.
and that gives adequate access for, is it called shadow or?
No. Smoky Lane.
Smoky, yes.
Yes, yes, that's what was called for.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. That's what I thought, what it looked like to me was it was an existing condition, and you're willing to dedicate right away to make sure that that stays in perpetuality forever
Yes.
as their access. Okay. Staff question. And I'm gonna talk, and this is on page 16 of 134. Staff comment. A multifamily residential use adjacent to an existing industrial use is considered an incompatible use. Okay? My question to staff is, what's the likelihood, okay, and it's a hypothetical, but if Brevard lumber did not exist, would that property be classified as industrial, or would it be classified as commercial and a more compatible use? It's the sore thumb. Is that a correct statement?
It's a difficult hypothetical to answer. But I think if you're asking, is the surrounding area industrial nature? No.
Okay. Well, I guess I'll rephrase the question a little bit. What other industrial property is contiguous to this area, in that area? Can you look that up for me?
Sure. There are none.
There are none? Okay. On page 19 of 134, the bottom staff comments, you talk about the conservation element, goal 1. But the only thing you failed to address in there, in my opinion, is the new tree ordinance and how that will be implemented to protect specimen trees, heritage trees, and there's another category there.
Mm-hmm.
In the ordinance, the actual PD ordinance, it talks about the removal of trees in there, okay? And it'll be a staff determination is what it appears to me. But when I look at the tree ordinance, it says heritage trees can only be removed if the DRC committee votes to have those removed. So it has to go to the staff. No one at staff can make that single determination. What I read in the ordinance, it says the DRC committee has to do that. So there's another hoop to go through before a heritage tree gets taken out.
Possibly, but there's another section, it's a subsection in there that talks about if there are a number of heritage trees and 75 of them are proposed to be protected, then a heritage tree could be removed without DRC approval. So there's a
Yeah, but when
possibility.
I read it, it does say that, but that's just consideration by the DRC. It still has to take DRC approval, and they may consider that there's additional ones. But I thought, the way I read the ordinance, was the DRC still has the final say.
I don't believe that's the case.
Okay, because I would like to know that for future anyways, okay? With the way the PD ordinance is written, because of the way the language is in there, does that preclude this applicant from having to go to the DRC to remove all the trees? Because it just says, it doesn't say you have to go there. So if we pass this ordinance, does that mean the DRC process doesn't apply?
I don't believe that was the intent, but let me see if I can find that language.
I'm sorry?
I don't believe that was the intent, but let me look into that language.
If you would, real quick. Okay, I'm on page 21 of 134 now, and item number 5. And it talks about the applicant will protect the public health, safety, morals, and welfare of the general public. And staff makes this comment. The proposed 35-foot enhancement landscape area between the residential and adjacent industrial zones should include specifics about the type and height of vegetation and screening materials to be help protected residents and potential. Why didn't you make that a condition, or is that in the ordinance? I didn't find it in the PD ordinance that was there, what the specifics were.
Sorry, I'm still working on the heritage trees.
I'm sorry?
Sorry, I'm still working on the heritage trees.
Okay. I'll let you catch up. And I got another question.
So to answer about the heritage trees, the section that I'm reading of the agreement is section 1.11 on page 42 of 134. And it says, the developer shall work with the city to adjust the layout of the master plan to achieve the preservation of healthy native trees where feasible. Heritage trees should to the extent possible be preserved in perimeter landscape yards and courtyards. The removal of protected trees shall be consistent with the criteria and requirements of Chapter 30, so it would meet the standard tree code.
So they do have to go to the DRC?
Correct.
Okay, I just want to make sure that is correct.
Right, it doesn't exempt them or preclude them from having to go to the DRC for anything that any other project would have
Sure.
to.
All right. I'm on page 22 of 134, item 2. Okay. I have a little bit of a problem with one of these conditions, and it's written this way in the ordinance also, because here's what it talks about.
Did you say page 22?
Page 22 of 134, item number 2, okay? It is talking about a condition of approval for a 6-foot fence and a 4-inch DBH canopy tree planting space minimum 30 feet, and a hedge. Now, here's where my problem is. To include a 6-foot tall opaque fence or wall along the property line with a evergreen hedge that will grow at least 6 feet within 1 year. I don't know any hedge that has ever been planted that grows 6 feet in 1 year. Okay, to 6 feet. So is that really a realistic condition?
I don't think it's for that shrub to grow from X to X plus 6. I think it's to grow to a maximum of 6 feet.
Do you know that's even available to get a larger, instead of a 3-gallon or 5-gallon hedge? Can you even buy them? I mean, what's a realistic, if a hedge grows a foot, that's probably pretty good in a year, which means they need to plant a 5-foot hedge. Is that even available? Do we know?
I do not know.
Okay. Mr. Honeycutt, do you know if that's available?
I've seen shrubs that are taller than the normal that you have. 5 feet, I don't know that I ever have. More like 3 or 4 I have seen.
Okay. I'm just concerned that we're putting something into a requirement in the ordinance that may not be achievable and setting the applicant up for failure right out of the block. That's just, when I read it, that's what struck me. So we might change that.
Could that height be achieved in 3 years?
I'm sorry?
Could that height be achieved in 3 years? Would you change the time or the height?
Yeah, if you can get I think a 3-foot, maybe even 4-foot would be a reasonable that you could probably get in the market and plant, okay? And if you could get, it'd have to be something that grows fairly quick. And there are some shrubs like viburnum and a few other things, I think, that grow fairly quick. If you got a foot of growth out of them in 1 year, it might take at least 2 years to get to that 6-foot level.
Member Rice, before you go on, I do want to circle back to your original question about the heritage tree and removal.
Yeah, okay.
So it's section 30-32, and it states, where 75% or more of the existing heritage trees are proposed to be preserved, review by the DRC shall not be required. So the DRC does
So it
not
doesn't have to
review
be
it
reviewed by DRC.
if they are preserving 75%.
What was the percent of the heritage?
75.
75.
So if there are 100 trees, 100 heritage trees, which is a lot, and 75 of them are being preserved, then you can remove 25 without having to go to the DRC.
Okay.
If I can interject, how many would be required in order to make that?
So that number would be based on the tree survey. We'd have to see how many heritage trees are on the site, and then 75% of those. So we'd have to see of the heritage trees on the site, what number and what number are being proposed to be removed. And then we could decide whether it needs to go to the DRC for approval or if it can be administratively approved.
My next question is on page 24 of 134. And it talks about item number 13, time schedule and appropriate surety. And it basically says that the PD will expire in 5 years, is what it says. I'm just curious, what happens to, if the commercial property is not developed within 5 years and it has a PD over top of it, what happens to that after 5 years? If the PD is expired, now what happens? Do all these conditions that we place go away also? I mean, what happens to it?
So either an extension could be granted, or the property would need to go through the rezoning process again, where staff could evaluate the conditions and see if it's appropriate to add those to the new PD ordinance.
Okay. And the only change would be the PD that is, if the residential site gets developed, it would stay intact as PD, but only the commercial would revert back because that's what's not developed?
Correct.
Not the
Or
whole?
that's the portion that they would apply for a rezoning. to.
Okay. So it'd be reevaluated, either the applicant would have to come back and apply for an extension, or whatever time the commercial came in after that date, it would be reevaluated completely. And what would be the zoning category at that, once it reverts back, it would go back to community commercial?
No, sir. So the zoning would remain. We would just not be able to move forward with the ordinance. It would have to be rezoned with whether those conditions move forward in the new
Okay.
zoning ordinance.
Okay. This is probably directed toward the applicant. This is rental property. What's the legal entity of who's going to own this? What type of legal entity is it?
It'll be a private LLC.
It will be a private
It will be held-
LLC.
Privately held.
Okay.
It'll be private investors that are partners together with me.
Okay. I'm going to ask questions of staff then. Private LLC, HOAs have certain requirements under state statute that they have to meet, and there has to be funds appropriated to meet improvements that are common area improvements, like roads and things that are in the HOA, or they can do a special assessment or what have you, and everyone pays dues toward those. If there's a problem in this development and it's a private LLC, what mechanism is there for other than code enforcement, okay, to make sure that this property is being maintained properly? The common space, because we got swimming pools, we got clubhouses, we have sidewalks, we have landscape buffers, someone has to do the maintenance and the yard work and all those things. So how do those things get addressed?
It would be code enforcement if it fails to meet the city's code. If it fails to meet the contract between the landlord and the tenant, then it would be a civil matter between those two parties. Depends on the nature of the maintenance issue. The swimming pool and disrepair, it's not a city code requirement to have, I don't even think there is one in this plan. But if there was a buffer overgrowth issue, that would be code enforcement purely. And so the city would get involved if there was an overgrowth issue, just like it would at a private property. And then we would cite the private landowner, the LLC that was just referenced, would be the one who receives the citation as opposed to any of the occupants. So site-wide, they would be responsible for any code enforcement issues being maintained.
Okay,
Does that answer your question?
I think so. That's sort of where I was thinking what would happen. I just want to see how that would work. And I guess it'd be like an apartment complex, basically.
Yes.
Is what it would function more like an apartment complex. Because it's not a condo, it's not, you're not selling property or anything. It's just selling rental of property. Okay. Is community commercial considered a more intense use than multifamily, staff?
It's kind of hard to say because in planning, we talk about density versus intensity, density being the number of units per acre, intensity being the square footage. And so it's kind of hard to, it's apples and oranges. But the commercial high intensity is not our least intense commercial district. And likewise, the proposed multifamily is not our less dense district for residential. So they are higher in the spectrum on both commercial and residential.
Okay. I guess what it settled in my mind is that you have commercial, multifamily, single family. Is that a normal transition from a commercial entity to a single family entity?
Yes.
Is that typically what planners say is the process?
Sure, yeah. So that's a typical transitional zoning scheme that you might see.
Okay. I'm on page 26 now of 134. Item C, unified control. It talks about the commercial property. It says the property will be under single ownership until the commercial portion is split. When will that be split? Do you know?
When we establish a financial structure for the projects, we'd likely have a different debt source for the apartments than we would for the commercial property. So by necessity, we'd have to split the properties so that each lender, there are different lenders as a rule, could have an identified asset. They would share access through the common access points, but they would have their own fee to pledge to the mortgage for those two properties.
Okay. And while you're there, I have another question. With the rental units, HOA documents have deed restrictions and all these restrictions of things that the people that live in that subdivision can and cannot do. What type of rental agreement documents are you going to have of what your tenants are allowed to do or not allowed to do? What type of protection will there be, not only for the internal people that live in your community, but the external people that have to look at your community?
Absolutely. No, I think it's a good question. First of all, we'll be glad to provide a sample document that is a lease document that is normally applied in a Class A project. And I say Class A project in terms of the management, because the quality of the management is really critical here. I might also point out, just for the general information, that you can buy a home and you can lease a house without ever having a criminal check. But in the industry of multifamily professional management, every tenant not only has a credit check, has a character check, and has a criminal check. It's the only environment except for co-ops where that is a requirement of ownership and occupancy, just so that you know. So there is actually a standard that helps to ensure the resident of the community is appropriate to the community you're serving. So I want to put that on the table, just as a part of it. Obviously, any operational property, any income property, has to maintain reserves and has to have a long-term strategy in terms of replenishing, replacing, and maintaining the property, because it's a big investment. I don't know about you, but $18 million for me will be the biggest investment I'll be before I hang up my towel. So I have a lot at stake. My family legacy is at stake on this investment. So I'm going to be as good a guardian of that property as anybody would hope to be. Having said that, professional management is all over the place today. Rental properties have become classified by the institutional marketplace as Class A assets. They've actually superseded office buildings, if you haven't seen how vacant many of the office buildings are. And they've superseded shopping centers. You don't have to look far around Titusville to see those are desperate assets. The multifamily community today is considered a Class A institutional grade asset because of all these things. So it really is in the best interest, both from a value and an income standpoint, to be a good steward. Now, what mechanism do we have to report? I don't know anybody that has a responsibility to provide their balance sheet, if you will, to the city to review, to make sure those things are in place. But I could tell you, since there are no homeowners, but there is a property owner, a proper balance sheet is a central part of any good business operation.
Okay, and staff, if you, please correct me if I'm way off base here, but HOA documents require that they get reviewed by staff, and then they get adopted by city council only for certain things that are built in there, like, it gets recorded, and it cannot be changed without approval of city council. The HOA documents can't, okay, is what it says. And what that really does is it protects the current owners of the property in that subdivision and the other people outside of that subdivision that look at the subdivision from a HOA group changing things in there to suit whatever they want to do without going through the process of the city. Can that same process work in a rental agreement with the restrictions?
I'm not aware of that previously existing. I can't say that it is prohibited, but I just don't know that we have done that in practice.
I'm sorry,
We haven't done it in
you
practice.
have not done it in practice?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Is there a problem with doing that in practice?
I think it would be up to city council if they wanted to review that. I think
Okay.
that's kind of where it goes to. I know that there's a requirement for those HOA documents to be reviewed by the local municipality, but I don't know that the local municipality, has thought about whether or not they want to have that type of review for an apartment community. It would depend on the nature of the guiding
Okay.
documents and the terms that are included in it as well, probably.
Is that the end of your questions, Mr. Weiss?
I'm checking. I'm getting to the PD ordinance now.
Thank you.
I've asked one.
I'm going to interrupt you then because you're on the similar track on this commercial part. And if commissioners would like to look at this page 26 of 134, I need clarification on the development of what kind of commercial property is going to be in with this development. Is there going to be a Family Dollar on the corner of a residential area? Yes, sir.
There's been no attempt to identify any prospects for the commercial component of the neighborhood. Our assessment of the market, however, is it's neighborhood, not regionally oriented. While the site is large enough to host a regional operation, and I would use like a Home Depot's or a Lowe's, which I believe is appropriate for the zoning classification. The reason we would not want to do that is out of respect for our neighbor, who's been a good friend, because that would be their competition. And so we perceive this to be small, I'm going to say cottage industries, but it doesn't mean it wouldn't be a brand that you would know. But there would be, the neighborhood services that you would normally expect to find in a residential community that had things like a dry cleaner and maybe a sandwich shop and a coffee shop and the things of the nature that you would want to patronize on a regular basis. We're not looking for a big box at all. In fact, if you look at our site plan, none of our boxes are bigger than 6,000 square foot. And 6,000 square foot, by the way, equates to the average size of maybe, at the biggest, an Olive Garden in terms of size. I mean, that gives you some scale. And so these are really smaller, and I say that in my presentation, it's not a big box development. It's a neighborhood-oriented retail development. I own a couple of them. And most of my constituents are the ones I just mentioned. The hair salon, the nail salon, the personal services, the spa, the fitness place, the kinds of things that vend services to the community that are within that 5-mile radius.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Rice,
I'm done.
addition, you're finished?
I have nothing else.
Okay, thank you very much. Do any other commissioners have a question or comment? I'm going to call the question, please. When staff introduced it, does it need to be two separate?
Yes, ma'am. Please make two separate motions, one on the future land use amendment and one on the rezoning.
Are commissioners clarified on that, what that is? Can you phrase that for him, please, then?
Sure, and it may be helpful to look at page 29 and 30.
Thank you.
We'll start on page 29. That's the future land use amendment. So on the left-hand side, you can see that what's being proposed, or what's existing now with the future land use is commercial high intensity, that red, that's outlined in red. And with the proposed change would retain the commercial high intensity to the east along the trail, along US 1.
I just need verbiage. I know,
Oh,
I
okay.
need to know how to phrase that, please.
So you would want to recommend approval of the future land use amendment from commercial high intensity to multifamily or medium density residential.
Do all commissioners understand that?
Yes.
Did you get that? Okay.
Madam Chair, I have a question
Yes, sir.
I have a question
Ms. Grant.
for Mr. Rice concerning page 22, the first condition. Are you suggesting that that condition should be removed?
No, I think I would not remove it.
Right.
I would, instead of saying 1 year, I'd probably say 2,
So
which
you'll
means they need to buy
modify it. Is that what you're saying?
4-foot shrub, and they have 2 years in which to get to the 6 feet. I just don't think it's realistic to get to 6 feet in 1 year
Okay.
at all.
All right,
That's
just trying
probably
to-
would be my recommendation.
Just trying to understand what you're saying here.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Calling the question. Member Rice.
Okay. I'm going to page 35 of 134, which is the ordinance for the future land use ordinance. I'm going to recommend approval of the future land use ordinance for the commercial land use to be changed to the residential medium density future land use designation as described in the ordinance and as shown on the maps. That's the motion.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Anton, second. Roll call vote, please.
Wait,
Excuse me, discussion.
I'm a little confused, and I need to know, I'm interested in having Mr. Rice's comment about no access to US 1 being written into this. Is this the time we would do that?
No, be in the zoning and the PD ordinance is where we need to include that. This is just the land use.
Okay.
Is that correct, staff?
Correct.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Any additional discussion? Now roll call vote, please.
Member Riley,
Yes,
Vice Chairman Richardson,
Yes, on this part.
Member Perez,
Yes.
Member Aton,
Yes.
Secretary Grant,
Yes.
Member Rice,
Yes.
Chairwoman Spidel.
Yes. Unanimously passing ordinance number, why doesn't it have a number?
The ordinances,
X2?
the ordinances aren't numbered
22?
until we get to city council when the city clerk's office puts in the number. This is just a
Okay.
template.
So this is the first ordinance. The second ordinance then is printed on what page, please?
38.
38? Commissioners? Does staff need to reread that? Mr. Rice?
In this section with the zoning, if we adopt this ordinance here, in effect, do we have to act separately on the PD ordinance after this, or is this part of that PD ordinance?
No, so this is part of it. By accepting this rezoning ordinance, you're agreeing to the conditions in the master plan.
Okay.
So if you'd like to make conditions
So
or
if
changes
any
to the
conditions,
master
this is
plan,
where I need to add
this is
that.
where you'd want to do it,
Okay,
correct?
that's what I thought, I just wanted to double check and make sure I was doing it right. Then I'm going to recommend approval of the ordinances on page 38.
Hold on,
I'm sorry.
just hold on, because I have a question for staff. Can one of the conditions be to reduce the number of units?
Yes.
So that's a conditional use.
No, ma'am. So conditional use is a different
Right,
process,
but-
different application.
But that would be addressed.
That's a condition that you could recommend adding to this PD ordinance. However, the master plan that's been provided tonight demonstrates 97 units. And so if you're going to then approve a master plan allowing only fewer units, it would be inconsistent with the current concept plan. So all that to say that the concept plan would have to change. It may be best, if that's your recommendation, that you table the item to allow for a master plan that matches your development, your agreement,
I understand. Okay, thank you.
And you probably would want to ask for concurrence from the applicant that they agree with any conditions to modify the proposed PD ordinance, as they would be going to council for final approval. And council will want to understand whether they accept and agree to any recommended changed conditions.
Thank you. Okay. Now I've interrupted Mr. Rice. I apologize.
Okay, I'm going to recommend approval of the zoning, PD zoning ordinance with the following conditions or changes. On page 42 of 134, item 1.9, I'm going to add section E. Section E says that no access to the US 1 from the commercial site shall be allowed.
Can I ask for clarification on that?
Mhm.
So access from the discussion to me has sounded like automobile access, like a curb cut, and I believe the applicant mentioned at some point possibly having access to the trail, meaning trail users, bicycles, pedestrians.
The intent is automobile.
Okay, thank you.
So I'll include that in the motion, that there'll be no automobile access from the commercial site will be allowed, and that's item 19E now. Under natural resources, my second condition, 1.11, natural resources.
Do we have a page number, Mr. Rice?
Same page, page 42. Okay. The sentence, I'm going to change this sentence, and the sentence currently reads, heritage trees should be extended possible, be preserved in perimeter landscape yards and courtyards. I want to change that to say heritage trees should to the extent possible be preserved, period. Not just perimeter, not just courtyards, but if there's a way to preserve a heritage tree, okay, in other areas, we need to attempt to try to do that. So that would be my change there.
Any additional?
Yes, there's one more, and that's my shrub one. Let me find it. Someone help me out, find the shrub.
Maybe 26, but that's just a guess.
Yeah, no, it's one, same page, 1.12, item, sub-item.
Okay.
A1.
A1. I'm going to change within a year to within 2 years. That's item 112.1. And those are the three conditions.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Perez? Mr. Perez, was that a second, sir? Yes? Okay, roll call vote, please.
Secretary Grant,
Yes.
Member Riley,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Richardson,
No.
Member Rice,
Yes.
Member Perez,
Yes.
Member Aton,
Yes.
Chairwoman Spidell.
No. And I need to stipulate why. I am concerned about the safety, especially of children in this location. I don't think that there are adequate sidewalks. And if you're looking at the platting of each from the far, and it looks like south, it would be quite a hike up to Dairy Road. I am still concerned about crossing a 4-lane highway with children of certain ages. I am very concerned about the lack of an HOA for protection of all leaseholders And I don't truly understand, if it's not an HOA, what it is, because we haven't been presented what this add-on rent situation is. I'm also extremely concerned about 648 average vehicles accessing Dairy Road. And I appreciate Mr. Rice's condition on trees and buffers. I am very, very concerned about the environmental concern that there has not been an adequate environmental study on the effects of the remnants of a concrete plant. And it concerns me also that a resident has reported that this may have been an asphalt dumping site. Is that enough?
Well, if I can add my objections are the density of it and the fact that I believe there's limited handicaps access to these units.
Those are your votes.
Will this go before city council at Tuesday's meeting?
This is scheduled for the 26th.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Additional comments? It does get sent to council, correct?
Yes, ma'am. So the application and the Planning and Zoning Commission's recommendation will both head to the city council on the 26th.
Will the comments from planning and zoning be also sent in the minutes to council members?
I don't believe that we currently send the P and Z minutes to the council members. Lori, help me out. Do we post them online or anything?
Peggy sends them to the council.
Oh, okay. So we do send them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Moving on. It passes. Yeah, it passes. I'm sorry. I wasn't clear. I thought I was. Okay. Item 9A, right-of-way vacate for road. I don't know how you phrased this week, all this, what is this row number? Oh, see, we talked about using initials.
I was
So,
hoping to expand. on
Row
my
number
presentation.
1 means right-of-way. Okay. At least you didn't put it on a star, right?
Nothing's on the agenda start tonight.
Okay, so you're trying to improve.
Although I do want to dip your toe in the water and get everyone comfortable with the agenda start eventually, because it is helpful in some applications to have.
Well, it isn't
additional-
helpful to us.
Okay, well,
And neither are
we'll get some
neither
training.
those initials. So you got to spell it out for us.
Sure thing.
Okay. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Right-of-way vacate, right-of-way number 1, 2022, Orange Street. Staff, please.
Thank you, ma'am. An application was submitted by Kim Rosenka requesting the vacation of a portion of the public right-of-way of Orange Street described in Exhibit A. Several agencies requested an easement be recorded. The staff recommends the following 2 conditions of approval. 1, that cross-access and maintenance easements are provided over all existing city-owned stormwater facilities, Spectrum and Florida City Gas facilities in the area to be vacated. And 2, in the event that compliance with the conditions set forth herein are not achieved within 180 days of the date of approval of this vacation, this resolution shall become null and void. So just a quick summary, and this item begins on page 68 of tonight's agenda. The city, Spectrum, and Florida City Gas all have utilities within this area proposed to be vacated. A right-of-way, for those who aren't familiar, is a piece of property that is owned by the city, and an applicant can request that the city vacate, give up that land. Sometimes it's split between the 2 adjacent property owners. In this case, the southern half of the right-of-way has already been vacated and belongs to the property owner to the south. And so this is to vacate adjacent, the northern half of that right-of-way. The first condition, the staff does want to make a quick change, if you would indulge us. Instead of saying that cross-access and maintenance easements, instead say all required easements, just to, we didn't want to specify cross-access because in this case, it may not be applicable. And we just want to make sure that all easements that may be required from any of these entities that have utilities within the right-of-way get the necessary easements if this right-of-way vacation is approved tonight. And that is all I have for my summary.
Thank you, sir. Are there any cards on this subject?
Yes. Kim Rosinka?
Ms. Lisinka, how are you?
Good, thank you. Good evening, Chairman Spadeau, members of the Planning Commission. My name is Kim Rosenka. I'm with the law firm of Lacey Lyons Rosenka in Rockledge. I'm here on behalf of Scott, Melanie, and Elizabeth Armstead. Scott Armstead is here with me if you have any particular questions that he can answer. This property is located on Garden Street. It's 4 units. It's where the Donuts for You is located. I'm sure you are very familiar with this property. And this backs up to Orange Street. The Armsteads have owned this property since May of 2000, I believe. That's about May of 2000. What had occurred is it's a rental property. And Mr. Armstead had mowed the backyard and thought it was his. Something happened, it got overgrown. He got a code enforcement violation or a notice. So he got his survey out and his property actually ends at the property line and this is right of way. So he called the city and they said, oh no, now we have to maintain it. And they said, why don't you vacate it? The other half was vacated back in 1998. So Mr. Armstead contacted me and we've gone through this process. It took a long time to get all of the utility providers to get out there and look at it and get back to us. So this has been in progress for almost 2 years. And as you said, no one has objected to this vacating. The city doesn't vacate it to it. They just need some easements to make sure they can get to the utility pole, anything else that might be out there. On page 87 of your report, it shows what's being vacated. This does butt up to the, I call it rails and trails. I know you guys have called it other things, but it's the walkway of the old railroad. And he would like to fence it because there are people that transverse through there, throw trash down there, Slurpee cups, things like that, beer cans. And he's been maintaining it. They've been maintaining it since 2000, actually on behalf of the city because they thought it was theirs. I do have some photos if you're interested because I'm sure you didn't transverse out there to see what it looked like. I don't have enough for everyone, but they're just 2 pictures.
So you are in essence maintaining city property?
Congratulations. I do the same. Good guy.
The first property that has the yellow wall, that's the back of the Armstead's property, and that's looking east. And then the second is the, still the back, but it's looking west, I believe. Yes, looking west. So it's just an easement. You'll see a fence there on the left. That belongs to the Walkabout Ministries housing. That was 25 feet that they received back in 1998. So generally, he just wants to be able to fence it, keep people from walking back there, maintaining it. According to your staff report, this is consistent with the comprehensive plan. It meets the transportation element. And the other items, that's also consistent with the land development regulations regarding vacating requirements. And staff does recommend approval of the vacating. The staff recommendation that I have says Aaron Galdo Street, but it's Orange Street. It may have been changed at some point. And so that we would ask that you approve or recommend for approval the vacating of this right-of-way, the 25 feet of Orange Street, with the conditions as recommended by staff.
Thank you. Is there an additional card, or do you need to speak, Mr. Armstead?
He put a card in just in case he was going to be asked to speak.
Ms. Riley first.
Yes, Ms. Rosanka. So This yellow wall, is that the base of the bike path?
No, that's actually the back of the Armstead's building.
Oh,
Yeah, that's the back, and that just shows where the 25 feet is, and that's looking east towards the walking trail bike path. So you can see the sign where it says Robbins in orange. If you look at it's right, it would be right at the western edge of the picture on 187, or on page 87. So that's right there at that corner of orange and.
okay, well, my question is, can a person pass under the, going on that right-of-way that you're talking about, can they pass underneath the bike bridge or not?
I don't know. Do you know the answer?
I'm trying to visualize what this right-of-way is. Is it on the
It's
map
just this.
over here?
It's just grass. That's all it is right now.
Right. When this property, when the eastern part of it abuts the bike trail, is there a passageway underneath the bike trail there or not?
You have to come up here so they can get you on.
Can you, just for the record, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, Scott Armstead, 1213 Garden Street. The bridge that they built over Garden Street is basically, I mean, from what I recall, looking east from where that corner of Orange Street is, you look at the side of the overpass. So in theory, I guess you can go through my property or the city's vacated right away and get to the easement that was the railroad easement, and you could walk north, I believe, in the grass or maybe on a sidewalk and get up under the bridge at the Garden Street where it goes over top of Garden Street.
So for a pedestrian, how inconvenient would that be for them if you vacated the right-of-way there, as far as them getting access from west to east?
They walk straight into a wall from that right of way.
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, they walk into a wall. They have to walk
There's-
north to get underneath.
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
So they don't use it.
Okay.
It's not convenient use. It's not used. It's.
Mr. Grant?
I have a question for staff. I may not be relevant or not, but is there a difference between street and avenue? One is called, this document is called Orange Avenue, and some other places called Orange Street. Now, it's Orange Street on the map, Orange Street on the street sign, but several places, including from the city of Titusville, they mention Orange Avenue. Is that relevant?
I don't know that it's relevant, however, there is an answer, yes, there is a difference. And there's a street naming convention in the code that talks about when you're supposed to name a street, an avenue, normally when it traverses north-south, as opposed to an east-west road. So there is a difference. In this case, it may have just been what's that?
East-West Street.
East-West Street, yes. So in this case, if you saw that interchanged in the report, that may have just been a typographical error.
Well, I'm sure it is, but I just wondered if anyone else saw it. That was a typo. Orange Avenue, Orange Street. You don't know what I'm talking about.
I think he does.
He just doesn't like making mistakes.
Oh, really? Is that it? Well, I apologize, Eddie. Okay.
And Mr. Grant would like you to be consistent with either street or avenue.
Noted.
It confuses me, man.
So that he is not confused, nor is anyone else. Thank you, Mr. Grant. Mr. Rice? Mr. Rice, you turned your light off? Okay, Ms. Riley. Okay, do I have any additional comments? Any additional questions?
Are there any other cards?
Are there any other cards on this?
No more
item?
cards.
Okay.
Thank you.
Do I have a motion? Mr. Richardson?
I would move we recommend to council the approval of right-of-way number 1-2022 Orange Street.
Sure.
Yeah, it is Orange Street.
And
I second.
roll call, discussion,
Yeah,
Mr.
discussion.
Rice.
Staff recommended that we change cross easement to all required easements. Is that part of the motion? Is that correct, staff? Is what you were recommending?
Yes, sir. If, I'm asking if that's part of your recommendation tonight, if you would please allow us to include that in your recommendation as that change.
So included.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Okay. Roll call vote, please.
Member Perez,
Yes.
Member Aton,
Yes.
Member Rice,
Yes.
Member Riley,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Richardson.
Yes.
Secretary Grant,
Yes.
Chairwoman Spidel.
Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you. Item 9B, conditional use permit, CUP. What does CUP mean?
Conditional use permit.
I do know that one. Okay. 4-2022, Sweet Peas Play Pod. Do we have staff first, please?
Thank you, ma'am. The applicant is requesting a conditional use permit, CUP, for an indoor recreational and commercial amusement use at 2400 South Hopkins Avenue. The applicants are requesting a permit to establish a children's indoor learning through play center in units E and F in the existing retail development. The property is zoned community commercial. The proposed use requires a CUP in the CC zoning district. Staff recommends approval of CUP number 4, 2022 as presented with no conditions. Summary on this item is all activities are intended to be indoors and there's no pickup and drop off because the parents are expected to stay with the children. And so staff had no proposed conditions related to this use. I will also add that in the past, we've had discussion about reducing the number of CUPs that come before this board, and staff is still working on those ordinances, residential uses, commercial uses, industrial uses, and trying to propose an ordinance that would reduce the number of CUPs that come before you. Hopefully, this would be one that we catch in that change. So just a heads up, we are still working on that ordinance, but in the meantime, unfortunately, this use requires a CUP.
Can you say where this is? I mean, on 2400 South Hopkins, what, is there something around it that I'd recognize?
Titus Landing.
Directly across from Titus Landing,
Theater.
Epic Theater.
Oh, is it within the mall?
No, ma'am. It's
Oh,
on the
it's just
west side
across.
of Hopkins Avenue.
Is it that new strip
It's
that's,
the redeveloped.
that's been
strip.
renovated?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, okay, okay. Are there cards on this item?
Yes. Amanda Danq.
Do you both want to stand up together? Okay, just introduce. This is painless.
My name is Amanda Dank. And Crystal Harris.
And do you need, can we have addresses?
2530 Hutchison Place, 5388 Hallamshire Boulevard.
Thank you so much. Ladies, what is your proposal?
We're applying for the conditional use permit to be able to open the indoor play place. I guess it was zoned for community commercial, which prohibits this type of business to open in there.
And tell me what's going on in there. Ages of kids?
8 and under. They just recently opened one in Melbourne called Melbourne Kids Village. It's not like a trampoline park. It's no obstacle courses. It's more creative learning. You'll have little playhouses like doctor's offices, veterinarian offices, houses where kids can actually role play and just interactive play, lots of sensory things. Parents would be present, which would also promote that parent-child interaction. It would help parents be able to interact with other parents, moms to get out and be able to socialize with other moms while their kids have a safe indoor place to play. We don't have anything like that here. We have parks and the bowling alley, and that's really it for kids to play.
What are the age groups that you're anticipating?
8 and under.
8 and under?
Mhm.
Okay.
It'd be really probably more toward the younger side of that, but we don't want to cut that off because of developmentally, we don't want to make it too low. I don't think that we would, if someone has an older sibling, it's not going to be like we're not going to let them come in, but ideally that's what it's going to be designed for when we set everything up.
How many square feet?
1,700.
Okay, so that's a pretty sizable area.
It's 2 units.
Okay, so there's a wall between each unit?
There is a wall, but the landlord is allowing us to remove the center wall. So
Okay.
we're gonna kind of cut that out.
And you don't follow under daycare legislation?
No,
It's
because the
just a
parents-
play center?
Because the
Okay.
parents would always be present with them.
Okay.
They have to sign waivers to be able to come into the play place to begin with, and they have to stay with the kids the entire time they're there.
What are the hours of operation?
We're still working on that, but right now tentatively, we're like 9 to 4, Monday through Friday. Saturdays, we'd have like a 9 to 1 playtime, and the afternoon would be reserved for birthday parties, because we also don't have many places for birthday parties here in the town. And then Sundays, we plan to stay closed.
Okay. What questions do commissioners have?
I had one.
Ms. Riley?
So are you limiting it to parents only, or are you including like nannies or babysitters?
Anyone who wants can bring them. It's not, we're not gonna be really stickler on who's bringing them. They would just, you know, be whoever signs the waiver, that's the responsible party for the child. Yeah, I guess any guardian at that point could bring them, because we wouldn't want to not allow nannies to bring the children that is in their care.
Because a lot of moms are working these days.
Exactly, and the waiver would be available online, so it would be, you know, something that the parent could access at home, fill out the waiver, and then it would be attached to their child.
Are there organized activities, or is it just free-for-all play?
We do plan
A
on
little
doing
both.
some organized activities.
Yes.
We want to do crafts during the day. We want to have story times, things like that. We also plan on having at least once a week. We've talked to a bunch of different other people in the community who, other moms who have businesses. There's been mention of a lady who does children's yoga and things like that we want to incorporate eventually once we get open and established.
Where is this have you ever seen this model before?
Yeah, let me grab my picture.
Okay.
There's actually several of them open. There's one that she had mentioned before, the Melbourne's Kid Village down in Vieira, that just opened a couple of months ago. And there's several of them over in Orlando and one in Port Orange.
Okay.
I just have 2 copies, but these are some examples of the 3 of the places that I take my kids to.
This looks fun. The Moo Mart, okay. So this is a dog park, a colorful dog park for kids.
That's a good explanation, sure.
And moms and dads are gonna be, or somebody's gonna be responsible for this crowd. That's very attractive. Does anybody want to see this? Okay. Any additional questions?
I've got one.
Yes, Mr. Faison.
Good evening, ladies. Over this way. Thank you. So how much does it cost and how long so if I brought my grandson, who is right now 10 months, his birthday is in September 5th, Ariana, just so that she knows I haven't forgotten his birthday because I keep forgetting. But so say I have my grandson. So I had my 10-year-old earlier this summer. And I tried to take him to a couple of camps, or actually he got hurt, actually, and I tried to take him to get seen. And because I wasn't his guardian, I couldn't get him any medical care. I was able to sign him up for Space Camp and other camps, so I was able to get him into something. But do you guys have any safety precautions in place for children that come to your center?
As far as safety goes, everything's going to be like floor level. We won't have any climbing things. All of the floors will be non-slip. There will be a barrier for the front door that has like a gate that the kids can't get past. So that's because there was a safety concern in one of the places that we had seen previously that didn't have a gate for the kids to be essentially locked into the place.
Like a stopping point.
Yeah, so they can't get to the front door. There'll be like, we have the emergency exits that will be available, but those doors will be locked at all times so that they can't get out the front door as well.
Perfect. And what about price?
Still working on it, but right now, tentatively, we were looking at $12.99 to be kind of like an all-day rate. And then sibling prices, we do a discount, like a $5 discount for siblings. We do plan to offer like memberships, so like a $35 per kid. You come as many times as you want throughout the month. And then we were in different tiers. Like if they have multiple kids, you'd have this tier. If you wanted a family package, this tier. Doing discount cards, you know, if you come so many times, you get a free visit, bring a free friend, things like that. But right now, it's $12.99-ish.
And last question, how many people can your center hold, this particular center hold?
I don't know how many it can hold, but we said for a birthday party, we wouldn't want more than 50 people in at one time. So I wouldn't ever want more than that probably in on a regular day either, just because of the crowds of children on top of each other.
We kind of figured that once we get once we sign the lease for the building and everything, we have to have the final inspection with the fire department and everything else like that, and they would give us our capacity for how many people are allowed in the square footage.
Because it's going to make a difference of how our things are set up with how many people we're allowed to have in at one time. But we kind of want to keep it at a smaller crowd just because of having little ones of my own. They do get, when it gets too crazy, they get trampled, you know, they can't all, we want to keep it on a smaller scale.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
A birthday party for 50 children?
Well, no, it'd be 50.
Frightens me.
I will, no, I should correct myself. Like 15 children and then you add
Oh.
on their parents. Like, so it'd be like 15 children and then you put two parents per child. It really wouldn't be 50 children running around.
I'm just a little scared there.
Yeah, I would be too.
Yeah. Okay. Any additional questions from commissioners? Mr. Richardson?
Yes, I just a comment, basically. I think this is really unique. I think it's a good thing for Titusville, and I noticed the veterinarian office and the space station, but it tells you how old we are. There's nothing about cops and robbers and cowboys and Indians on here. But I think it's a good thing, and properly managed, you'll probably have to expand.
That was actually something we discussed, was the size. You know, we don't want to go too big because we don't know what Titusville's going to do to support us. So we figured we kind of start in the middle and work up.
I even like the name. Any additional comments? Yes, ma'am.
Right here.
I just am wondering about the parking situation, if there's adequate parking, if there's going to be parents, you know, are going to be staying with the kids. And I'm really familiar with that area, and I just wonder, you know, if you were filled to capacity, if there would be a parking issue there.
I don't think that there would be too much of a parking issue. There's quite a few parking spots in that plaza, and any overfill, it could go over to the Titus Landing parking lot where the Harley Davidson is, because they don't use that whole back side of the Harley Davidson parking lot. But there's not too many other places in that plaza that would have, other than Pizza Place.
The Pizza Place is going to be the only place that's going to generate
a
lot of business either. The other things in that plaza, it's 1 or 2 cars at a time.
And on a daily basis, I don't think that we would have that many people in there.
Not at one time. The moms are going to be coming, you know, 2 hours tops before a toddler gets bored, and then rotating the cars out.
Thank you.
Good question. Additional comments? Mr. Anton?
Well, one's a question, one's a comment. So on the encouragement side, a long time ago, probably 12, 14 years ago, there's a place called Wanna-Do City down in Sawgrass Mills on Southwest Florida, and my kids still talk about going there. And it was this on a much larger scale, probably too large, so I think you're smart in kind of managing it. But yeah, they loved it. There was actually Publix branded the little grocery store cashier thing, and so there was business interaction with local businesses and everything. My question was, what's the level of control for not so much the kids getting out, but undesirable people getting in? Adults, is there a person working the door? How do you manage an adult, disreputable adult wandering in with a bunch of kids?
That gate would help with that as well.
Okay.
Our desk would be in front of that gate.
So there is somebody
there's gonna be a
full-time
desk.
at a desk monitoring.
And that gate would be maintained by us. Like, we're gonna make sure who's going
Buzz
in and out.
people in and out or
Yes,
whatever.
to make sure.
Okay.
I also hope to plan putting cameras in, things like that at the door to help with that too, just for an extra monitoring system. Because I did think about that too, you know, especially with the world now.
We both have small children.
Yeah, we have small children, so all that stuff kind of goes through our heads as well.
Ms. Riley?
Yeah, I like the concept of what you're doing. I appreciate you doing this in Titusville. One thing, though, I would just point out to you, and I'm not going to interfere with how I'm going to vote, but you got to be careful about having your patrons cross the street to park at another place. It's got a lot of problems with insurance. It's a lot of problems with liability, accidents. And you also may get some pushback from the people at the Titus Landing. So I'm just telling you that as a cautionary note.
Thank you.
I will mention another cautionary note, just a second, Mr. Charles, is not necessarily undesirable visitors, but any question with custodial and non-custodial parents, and some of the issues that we have within the school system and how we vet people who come in and how, so advisory. So the services of a good attorney, maybe. Mr. Charles.
Yeah, I'm probably the only one on this commission that has adult children, and I have a 3-year-old. And I think my wife has already been seeing some of your posts before and thought this is a great idea. And so I want to know if I can get a discount as an early adopter. But I like that you have maybe a membership. I think that's a great thing. And as far as Titus Landing, I own the Christmas shop at Titus Landing, and so if you need any help with parking and stuff, I can I'll put in a good word for you. But I think it would be great for that area too, because there's not a lot you have salsas and stuff, and you have some businesses, there, but a lot of that parking up there is empty a lot. And if people see that as hey, they're letting us use this area, maybe they'll come to our stores like the Christmas shop. So I think that'd be a good addition, but good luck to you. So thank you.
Any additional questions or comments? Can we call the motion, please?
I'll do it.
Mr. Grant?
Oh, yeah. I recommend we approve conditional use permit 4-2022 without conditions.
Second.
Roll call vote, please. Any discussions? Nope. Roll call vote, please.
Member Aton?
Yes.
Member Rice?
Yes.
Secretary Grant?
Yes.
Member Riley?
Yes.
Vice Chairman Richardson?
Yes.
Member Perez?
Yes.
Chairwoman Spidel?
Yes. Thank you for being some innovation here for especially, this is exciting.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just a clarification, Eddie, will this be heard at council meeting on Tuesday?
This is scheduled for the 26th, July 26th.
Thank you so much.
Good luck, ladies, and thank you. 9C, Sylvester Palm Ordinance, please.
Last but not least, thank you, ma'am. This item begins on page 120 of 134. At their March 9th, 2022 meeting, the TEC recommended the removal of the wild date palm, Phoenix sylvestris, from Table 1, Section 5 of the Landscaping Technical Manual, list of approved canopy trees. On May 10th, 2022, City Council approved advisability for staff to proceed with the code amendment. The proposed ordinance amends 2 sections of the code to delete all references to the wild date palm. And no summary on this item. It's pretty simple. However, I do want to remind the commission that you have 2 members of the TEC on your board that may help provide some additional background information. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Do either of the members on TEC have a comment concerning this ordinance? Mr. Rice?
Well, I'm not a tree expert by any means, but it's my understanding from my fellow TEC members is there's some type of disease or something that these trees get, and it affects other trees or what have you. I mean, Mr. Perez might know better than I do, but that was my understanding. That's why the recommendation was just not to recommend having those.
Okay. Mr. Perez, would you like to comment on these?
Well, that pretty much says it all. What we're finding is that a lot of these palms are beginning to die, and they're expensive palms. So, you see them dying already. And we're trying to slow down the disease's movement, through the rest of the palms in the area.
Bad boys in the palm world?
I guess you'd say that.
Okay. Any additional questions or comments?
I have one.
Mr. Richardson?
Is this the type of trees that were put in the redevelopment of Winn-Dixie that we talked about? The remaining oak trees should remain, but they were tearing up the parking lot, I'll admit. But went ahead and approved these that were just planted?
Yes, sir. So those are the trees that were, this species of tree is what was planted or proposed in the site plan for that shopping center.
Well, Kay, you were right.
What does that mean?
She told the council that not to let them plant this type of palm tree because they were diseased. They're also along US 1 in places, they're dying, you know.
Ouch. Thank you, Kay. They look good now. When are they going to die? Any day? Is there a card on this item? Ms.
Yes,
Kay?
Kay St. Ange.
Kay St. Ange, Maryland Avenue. The University of Florida IFAS first detected this disease. You're talking about lethal bronzing disease. Lethal bronzing disease in 2006 in exotic Sylvester, date, Canary Island, and Queen palms. So it's not just the Sylvester palms, it's all these exotic palms. 2 years later, the same disease was detected in our native cabbage sable palms. It's spreading. To date, the disease is most prevalent in the central part of Florida. Per the University of Florida, I'm quoting them, to date, the disease is most prevalent in central part of Florida, but is spreading and can be found in 36 different counties in Florida, affecting 21 species of palms. So yes, Laura Lee has mentioned to council that she sees this in Orlando near Disney World. She's seen it. She travels all around Florida and she continues to see it spreading in these exotic palms that are being planted for landscaping purposes. And they look beautiful initially, but it takes a little bit of time. And then before long, as Laura Lee would say, they look like this, all droopy. And it is occurring in the sable palms along the railroad track. I believe that's what's happening there by Drayfield Park and a number of places in town. So, but staff has indicated that the proposed ordinance amends 2 sections of code to delete all reference to the wild date palm. But I wonder if staff would be willing to remove the Sylvester palm from Table 1 recommended under the palm tree list, not just the canopy tree list. I believe TEC probably hadn't scrolled down to see that these palms, these Sylvester palms, are under the palm tree list. They're still there. I don't know if staff has removed them. And TEC just focused on the Sylvester palms, but really all these types of palms, these exotic palms, should be removed from the recommended tree list. It's hard to grasp just what it would look like if this spread to all of our sable cabbage palms. And once it spreads, you have to remove them in order so it doesn't keep moving on down to the next tree. So just imagine how expensive it would be. It'd be like the American elm trees where you lose a whole species of trees in a region. And that is our Florida state tree, the palm tree. So I would just hate to see that. And of course, wildlife, birds, everything lives in those trees, the native trees. So we just don't want it to spread from the exotic to the native trees. And so I would like to see all these exotic trees removed from the recommended tree list. Thank you. Any questions?
Don't go anyplace.
Okay.
So rather than just stipulate the wild date palm, there needs to be an entire list.
I believe that all the exotic trees, palm trees, need to be removed. So that's the Sylvester, the date, the Canary Island, the Queen palms. I think all those are on that recommended list in the tech manual, Table 1. But I do know that the Sylvester palm was not only under the canopy tree recommended list, but also under the palm tree. And most of these exotic trees are under the palm tree recommended list for landscaping. It's a list that developers use when they develop a new development. They look at the recommended list and see how many, what could we do here? What should we plant? What is the city recommending that we plant? And they'll plant all these trees and it looks really pretty, but I'd hate to see developers lose their investment as well, because oftentimes they have to come back and replace them. So it's just something people need to be aware of. And University of Florida is trying to make them aware.
Thank you so much, Kay. So staff, this needs to be all rewritten to include everything on that table.
What I would say is I wasn't present for the Titusville Environmental Commission meeting where this recommendation originated. You have two members here that can provide some more background information on whether they think it's pertinent or in line with the recommendation. I will say that what I understand Ms. Anand is proposing would be to eliminate those trees so that the only type of palm that could be planted within the city is the sable palm, which severely limits flexibility for landscapes. And so I would just take that into consideration that some developers may, some sites for development may feel restricted. And so that's just something to consider. But again, as far as where this recommendation came from and the origins and how best to implement the intent, I would have to defer to the TEC members.
Okay, TEC members, what do you have to say, Mr. Rice?
Well, in my opinion, I think we move forward with this one, okay, and go ahead and get taken care of this problem. And then TEC probably needs to go ahead and bring it up at their board meeting to look at these other ones if they are.
TEC is not in a legislative commission, so they can't propose legislation.
No, well, they can take up,
Can they?
yes.
Oh, they can?
Yes, ma'am. So the Titusville Environmental Commission is charged with reviewing general environmental impacts of the city or development. And
Okay.
so this isn't within their purview that they could generate a recommendation to the city council.
Now, we have to have a vote to take it up
Right.
as a group, but,
Okay.
so one member can't say, do this. It's going to take
Okay.
a group effort, but it's something that can be raised from the podium again, petitions and requests from the public, and we can act on it as TEC.
Mr. Perez,
Perez,
come up. Yes,
yeah.
Mr. Perez.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit of background. I think the reason why we sort of zeroed in on the Sylvester palm is because that is considered a canopy tree. And when the incident occurred at Winn-Dixie, right away we heard that they intended to replace with a Sylvester palm. And I believe Laura Lee initially brought it up, or maybe Kay, that these exotics had this problem. But of course, the Sylvester palm is the only one that's considered canopy. And that's what was going in, and at that time, we allowed it, and until the ordinance changes, it'll continue to be that way. And that's why they're in there now. That's the only other thing that they could go to, I believe.
So your recommendation would be to pass this now and then go back to TEC and hope that TEC brings this up?
Yeah, I think
For
that would
the
be the
additional
natural course
bad boys.
of
Okay,
what needs to happen.
okay, excellent. Ms. Riley?
I was going to just ask you for a definition of exotic, but I think that'll be taken care of with TEC, so.
No, exotic is non-native.
But I mean, if you put that in your ordinance, would that completely notify everybody of what you mean?
I'll let somebody else answer
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
I don't write ordinances.
Okay, do I have a proposal for this ordinance, please? Mr. Rice? Nope. Mr. Perez? Nope. Mr. Richardson?
Well, I make a motion that we recommend to council the approval of the ordinance XX 2022 regarding Sylvester Palms.
I'll second.
Is there any discussion on this item? Roll call vote, please.
Vice Chairman Richardson,
Yes.
Secretary Grant,
Yes.
Member Perez,
Yes?
Member Rice,
Yes.
Member Riley,
Yes.
Member Aton,
Yes.
Chairwoman Spidell.
Yes. It unanimously passes. Okay. Petitions and requests from the public present or the press. Seeing none. City staff,
No report, thank you.
city attorney.
I have a question.
Okay. Members, Mr. Richardson?
I have a question, Eddie. As much as you can tell us right now, we're all aware of Peggy Visaka's retirement coming the 12th or something of August. Have they made a decision? I saw in an article in Florida today that Brad is going to take her place. Is that permanent or
Yes, sir. That
Okay.
that is permanent. That is
including the development aspect of it?
I'm sorry?
Including well, she's referred to as a development director.
Yes. So Peggy currently is the community development director. She's retiring on August 12th, and Brad Parrish, our current planning manager, will be moving to her
Okay.
role.
Have you hired anybody? Have they hired anybody for those vacant positions?
We have been interviewing.
So it'll be,
Me and Brad.
the staff is.
We are struggling, to say the least.
I recommended 2 years ago.
And Rachel, but Rachel is kind of a specialized planner, so as far as handling most of these applications, it's me and Brad, so take it easy on us.
When we had that community meeting, Jane was sitting next to me. 2 years ago, I recommended that they double the planning staff.
Nobody wants to do this?
What we're finding is we're having a hard time finding applicants coming out of school that have the skills and the interest. Public sector work is not as exciting as the private sector in to some minds, and we've been interviewing vigorously.
Quite frankly, is it the pay?
It could be, but however, I would say that we're in the middle of a pay study now, and so I think that we will be very competitive, or at least on par with other cities. So if that is a consideration, the biggest challenge is when they come from out of state, because then they have state income taxes, they usually get paid more, and then they see the rate here in Florida seems much less, when really, when you even everything out, it comes up about to the same.
So, a question that might embarrass you. Have you moved up to Brad's position?
I have not. Thank you for asking.
So you're still bagging groceries?
I wasn't going to say anything.
I did. Just a comment. What we do in the school system, since we're about 300 teachers short this year, is we advertise the sunshine. We've done that for, I don't know, a long time. So just say, there's some sunny days. I call for the adjournment of the July 20th meeting, planning. Anybody else, any other members have a comment?
When's our
Nope.
next meeting? I'm getting things confused.
Uh-oh.